So first, tell me just kind of about the National Motorcycle Museum in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, so it started in Sturgis, South Dakota, and really about I guess a little over 15 years ago, it basically moved to Anamosa. Obviously, my dad and mom have been a huge supporter of it, and really trying to make it grow. It was kind of like my dad's dream to just build something, almost like the Field of Dreams, build it and they will come, right?
Right.
Uh, and so it started out as a smaller building downtown Anamosa, and then it moved out to it's an old Walmart building is where it's actually at now. So when my dad actually bought the Anamosa Walmart building when Walmart did that super store, back in the in the 2000s. So and
Sure.
he's but no, it's at its peak at over 500 motorcycles. It still has over 350 or 400 motorcycles right now. So it's a great collection of really all bikes, right? It's a great collection of obviously the American bikes, your Harleys, your Indians, and then all those one-offs, the Merkles,
Right.
the Sears Roebucks, the Thors. But what I think it makes unique to some of the other museums in the nation is it does have a lot of the European bikes, BSAs, Vincents, has a large collection of those, and then it has a decent collection of the Japanese bikes. So I think when you go to other museums, you're not pigeonholed, but there very few have all of it, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that's what made it unique in its day.
Yeah, I mean, when we went there, I mean, you literally saw everything. Like you said, BSAs, Nortons, Triumphs, Harleys. I mean, everything. I mean, it's very impressive. So, so what was it like? I mean, you grew up in this world. What was it like kind of growing up around all these motorcycles, around J&P cycles, coming up and now to being where you're at now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, so my parents started GMP in 1979. So I mean, I literally grew up going to swap meets, right? So
Right.
most of the swap meets I grew up going to early for GMP. It was used parts swap meets or even new part swap meets. That's really how my parents got their start on GMP cycles. But my dad always loved to go to the antique ones. And in the early days, it was just go to see, maybe buy a few things, right? I
Right.
really couldn't afford most of the stuff he wanted, right? Obviously.
Yeah.
But I grew up, in Davenport around Labor Day every year with the races, the flat track races. My parents put those races on, I don't know, 20 years on Friday nights at the antique event in Davenport. And so that's really every Labor Day weekend I grew up on that track basically when I was younger. The funny story is my mom's uncle let me pound the track of him when I was 5. I sat on his lap and I was the one driving the van. Well,
Wow.
obviously not the pedals, but I
Yeah.
could hear my mom yelling at him on the radio, like, "What are you doing, Doug?" So a lot of memories. But I think then when he sold the company in 2001, obviously he got a little bit more of a personal endeavor of funds to go fuel his passion.
Yeah.
And did he do that? For sure. So in the 2000s and into the early 2010, 11, 12, he really fueled that passion, which really built the collection that you see today, and that will be on auction in about a week. It's it's been really cool. I mean, I've got to know a bunch of those guys. I mean, we would grow up in Davenport sitting next to Mike and Frank, right? And everybody's
Yeah.
like, "Oh my gosh, Mike and Frank." Well, they were just two guys that were doing the same thing that my dad was doing back then, right? Obviously, that's fully changed now, but
Yeah.
that's really how I grew up with these guys. So I think it'll be a great experience next week to get to hang out with them again. To be honest, right? And my mom's going to Davenport today, and
Mhm.
so it's really cool.
Yeah, so the museum is unfortunately closing down. When I talked to Jill, she said it just you don't get the attendance, unfortunately, where it's at that other places get, and everything's going into auction through Mecum. So can you kind of tell me about that auction? How you guys decided to do that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously my parents have been the fundor of the National Motorcycle Museum for a long time, really since it moved to
Mhm.
Anamosa. To be honest, it's ebbed and flowed, but it was a board decision to close it. Obviously, my mom and myself are on the board, but really what it is my mom wanted to retire, and the largest donor of the National Motorcycle Museum really didn't want to be the donor anymore, right? Now
Sure.
she happened to also own a very large portion of the collection that's being shown.
Hmm.
But really what it is it's a sad thing. I think if the museum wouldn't have, I mean, don't get me wrong, my dad built it, and they will come. They just didn't
Hmm.
all come, right? And so
Sure.
and that's I think if that museum would have been in Milwaukee or in Chicago, even even if it was in the Midwest but a bigger city, it probably would have been fine, right? But it
Sure.
happens to be in a town of 5,000 people, and it's a beautiful town, but doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily get the traffic to help fund that museum. So that's really why it's closing. Is it a sad? Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think you could take it two ways. I think the really cool thing is how many people have come this year. That's
Yeah.
the really cool thing, right? So we announced in January, and I think she's had more attendance this year than she's had in a few years, right? Like so,
Hmm.
and so to see all the people coming is pretty cool. So
Yeah. Yeah. How do you think, I talked to a couple of people around the museum and talked to Jill. And, with these auctions, you never know how they're going to go. Do you have any predictions? You think one person's going to come in and buy the whole thing? You think, anything?
I mean, I think there'll be a decent amount of people that go to Davenport, the antique show this weekend, and stay around and come in person. But I do think a
Sure.
lot of it's going to be done online. Um, and what's different about this auction, maybe to even EJ Cole's, that was done in 2011 or 12, is it's got like an airplane in it. It's got a flat track. It's got a bunch of things that are not necessarily just motorcycle. A ton of
Right.
bicycles, a ton of toys, right? And so I think you're going to get a vast variety of people. I mean, that's one thing my dad was good at was collecting. I think you're going to get a decent amount of people that are different. I don't think it's going to be like a one person come in and buy it all by any means. I
Hmm.
think you'll have guys or groups or even museums that come in and buy a decent chunk to help their museum. And
Sure.
I think that's Mika asked me the same question. You know, are you sad? And I'm like, no, I'm not sad. I mean, because obviously my whole point of my dad's thing was these to get seen. And so the
Right.
whole goal, the whole goal of this is, I mean, we're really closing the museum because people weren't seeing them, right? Like
Hmm.
the whole goal
Hmm.
is for people to see the history, and so I think this is a good chance for that to happen again. So
Yeah, my impression was that I'm optimistic that they're
yeah,
going to go to good homes. They're going to be
yeah,
taken care
yeah.
of, and they'll be seen. I think that's the best way you could put it. So, going back to growing up, were you hooked on motorcycles from the start, or was it kind of a slow burn? Or
I don't necessarily have the passion for the antique ones like my dad does, but I've definitely been
sure,
in the more. I definitely love riding motorcycles. I mean, I've actually rode to Sturgis since I was 12 years old. I've only missed 1 year.
wow,
So, and so most of that started when I was with my dad, right?
sure,
But yeah, I've rode 27 times to Sturgis in my lifetime. I mean, there's
wow,
very few people that could even say that, right? And so,
yeah,
and definitely nobody under the age of 40. So, yeah, I have a passion for riding. That's what's, obviously I've worked for GMP Cycles now over 20 years myself.
uh huh,
And the group I belong to now. But it owns GMP Cycles. But it's really a passion, right? It's a feel. You see that when you go to events. You see that when you go in the museum and see these people, right? They're either riding their motorcycles in, or they're like. They're like a 5-year-old in a candy shop when they walk in that museum, right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's the cool feeling you get, right? Is, oh my gosh, right? Like their eyes get big, and they spend hours, and then they walk out saying like, oh my gosh, I didn't even see everything, can I come back, right? And that's what you hope, right? And
yeah,
that's
yeah, for
that's why
sure.
you do it. And so no, yeah, I definitely feel that passion still.
Nice. Yeah, we actually met a trio of guys from England over here in America for 2 weeks, and one of their stops that they had to do was check out
Yeah.
the National Motorcycle Museum. So, and they're
And
they're
I
riding.
actually think we will see some of the bikes not stay in the United States. I actually think they may not be in person for the auction, but I actually
Hmm.
do think we'll have a decent amount of auction folks that aren't necessarily stateside bidding on the bikes next week. So, which is good and bad. I mean, I don't necessarily want them to leave the United States, but the same thing is they're going to a good home, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you're shipping a bike over to England, you obviously it's going to go to a good home, right? So
Yeah.
I think so I think we'll see that also.
So, do you have any special memories or stories about, helping your dad put the museum together, maybe taking some trips with him to go buy bikes, or just kind of anything, a memory of the museum that you'll kind of cherish?
It'd probably be the day. I mean, I've been to Wasion, I've been to Oli, I've been to all those events with my dad, and obviously
Yeah.
those trips with his buddies because we'd always go in a van, right? We'd never fly there. We'd always do the anywhere from 5 to 10 hour trip in the van, right? And
It's the
so
Midwestern
hearing
way.
this,
Yeah.
yeah, hearing the stories of some of his, the Dave Orts of the world that I've known since I was little, and grown up with will
Yeah.
be cherished memories. I mean, I think one of the coolest ones was when we were in Davenport one year, and Willie G and his wife came to the booth and just sat down and talked to my dad. That was pretty
Uh,
cool.
yeah.
Like you see this idol that's basically brought Harley out of the AMD crunch, and like you think like, oh, this guy's a movie star type thing. And he just sat down and talked like there was nothing else. I mean, that'd be one of the things. When I was in high school, I'd help my dad on eBay, so I was
Oh, yeah.
I was literally doing I don't know 5,000 6,000 transactions when I was a junior in high school for him on eBay.
Jeez. Yeah.
But we would buy bikes. I mean, I bought some of those flying Merkles that you saw off eBay, because that's
Wow.
even now a lot of that happens on eBay, but back then
Sure.
it really happened, right? This was 20 years ago, and so probably the hunt with my dad was pretty cool, right? Like going to find the parts or having him, because he wasn't as good on the internet as I was, so he'd have me go try to find the parts for him.
Sure. Yeah.
Because a lot of those bikes that he has didn't come whole, right? They were built
Mm.
by people like Dave and others that
Yeah.
would take portions of them, or find married up gas tanks to the actual motors, and and then find the frame, right? I mean, that's the hunt that most of these guys go through when they're picking, and so doing that with my dad will always be a memory.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. Because, I mean, when you look at the bikes, you don't think about it. You don't think about the
No,
work that goes into them. You don't think about all the pieces that go into it. And God, having to find that stuff. I mean, some of that's
yeah.
probably like a one of one.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and technically he owns some of those 101s that I even last year my mom sold a Cyclone tank to a gentleman that my dad doesn't even own a Cyclone, but he owned the tank, right? And so and this guy basically had everything else but the tank, right?
And
And
that
so
was it. Yeah.
you made that guy so he can go build that bike now, right? So
Yeah. So are
yeah.
there any, we talked to Jill, your mom, and she said that she's got about 10 bikes that she's kind of taking for her own collection. Are there any bikes that you're, taking for your own collection?
So we work together. They're at her house. I
Okay.
don't necessarily have a
Yeah.
way to display them at where I live. But yeah, the 10 to 15 she took, I was a part of.
Cool.
The one, technically the Flying Merkle, which happens to be on my shirt.
Right.
That 1911 original racer that my dad bought at the EJ Cole auction. Actually, Meekum put that on too. So my dad bought that bike really when he was dying, to be honest, right? I mean,
Mm.
and so like it's got two memories, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I have to imagine between that and then the yellow Harley, um,
Yes.
which is
Yeah. I mean, obviously,
that is a beautiful motorcycle. Seeing that in
it
person
is.
was amazing.
It is, and it's it's by far nothing special to most people,
Sure.
but to my mom and I, it means everything. So
Yeah, I liked the big sign that said "not for sale." Definitely, most positively, not for sale. So, well, last question I got for you, Zach. What do you think, or what do you hope the legacy of the National Motorcycle Museum will be?
I mean, obviously, it's going to be a lot of great memories for people. I think hopefully this collection, because not all the collection being sold next week is technically my parents, right? The National Motorcycle
Hmm.
Museum has some bikes that are going to new homes, and really, I think the whole goal of it was to create memories, create stories. Is really the goal of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is very bittersweet. It's sad that that it does have to close down. But I agree with you. I think these bikes are going to go to some good homes, and we'll see what happens.
So yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, obviously my mom knows all the folks that own the major museums, Barber and
Sure.
Dale's old museum in North Carolina, right? So that his son's running now, Matt. So yeah, I hope some of them go there, either through them needing them or donations, right? I mean, some of these people
Yep.
that buy these bikes want to show them off. So I hope those other museums can benefit, obviously where people can see these bikes going forward. So